Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, we could be facing a massive rail strike in a number of days, and President Biden is apparently in total panic mode over it. So we've got Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg holding emergency meetings to try to avert a shutdown, which would upend the economy and could tank Democrats' midterm prospects. President Biden has reportedly personally intervened as well. So I'm going to break down the whole situation. We've been covering this for a while, but keep in mind, as we dive into all of this, this is a completely avoidable crisis, could be immediately averted if the railroad bosses would just treat workers humanely with some really basic provisions, things like time off and sick days. Now, I have been warning of this for a while. You'll recall railroad workers have been furious with their mistreatment by corporate bosses. Freight rail prospered during the pandemic, with companies including Warren Buffett-owned BNSF recording historic profits. Workers, though, of course, have not been cut in on that deal. Quite the opposite. As demand surged, workers have been forced to shoulder the burden with insane schedules. Literally no sick days, literally no weekends. Many of those workers voted to authorize a strike months ago, but because of the peculiar quirks in the law governing railroad labor, these workers were barred for a time from taking any action. Instead, President Biden appointed a board to propose a potential compromise contract. That compromise had some decent provisions on wages, but left unresolved the quality of life issues that for many workers was the main primary point of pain. After all, workers right now are being fired simply because they have to take care of routine doctor's appointments or because they get sick. So for the largest two unions representing a bulk of these workers, the proposed compromise was wholly unacceptable. An informal survey of rank-and-file rail workers found that more than 90% would reject the board's recommendations. 96% said they should strike once they are permitted to by law. And that date is now just days away. Workers could strike as soon as Friday if no deal is reached. And by the way, these employers could also have a lockout by Friday as well. So what will happen now? Well, ideally, management will come to a deal that everyone can live with. But the signs right now, they are not good. Instead, the railroad CEOs seem to be pushing for Congress to get involved here. Because railway labor relations, again, are governed by their own set of laws, one provision allows Congress to cram down a deal that both sides would be legally bound by. Right now, rail bosses are weaponizing their economic weight to try to scare the politicians into taking action, since the railroad bosses expect that they would get a better deal with elected officials who are worried about donors in midterms than they would directly negotiating with the unions and the workers. So already, even in advance of the potential strike or lockout, freight carriers are putting an embargo on certain types of shipments and warning that rail shippers could be blocked from making any shipments at all. Effectively, what they're doing here is trying to hold rail shipments hostage to gain leverage in the negotiations and try again to force Congress's hand. The unions, who sense that Congress would side with industry, are adamantly opposed to congressional intervention. In a joint statement, they wrote, quote, "These self-appointed titans of industry complain constantly about government regulation and interference, except now when it comes to breaking the backs of their employees. It's time for the federal government to tell the CEOs who are running the nation's railroads into the ground that enough is enough. Congress should stay out of the rail dispute and tell the railroads to do what other business leaders do, sit down and bargain a contract that your employees will accept." Now, if Congress keeps their nose out, that would leave a third possibility that we face an actual strike or a lockout. Now, the economic impacts of this would be huge. We're talking passenger and freight rail, vegetables rotting, consumer goods stuck, backlogs growing, and threatening the Christmas shopping season. The last thing we need right now is more supply chain issues, just that there have been some positive signs on inflation, although we got a new report today, things aren't looking so good there either. And all because rail bosses don't want to let people have enough time off to go to a frickin' doctor's appointment. Although I have no doubt most of the mainstream press will frame this all as the workers' fault, given current historic levels of support for unions and public support for recent strikes, they might have a bit of a tough time trying to manufacture consent on this one this time around. Regardless of whether the public sides with the workers or industry, however, doesn't take a political genius to figure out such an outcome would be a disaster for Democratic midterm prospects. Hence, the emergency meetings and general panic that set in at the White House this week as they stare down the barrel of a September surprise that could easily undo all the polling gains they have made in the past couple months. I'm sure Mayor Pete's got this all under control, right, guys? The media is just now waking up to this story and what a big deal it could ultimately be for politics, for economics, and obviously for workers. Keep a close eye on this one as that Friday deadline approaches. We're about to find out just how committed Biden actually is to his pro-worker rhetoric. So Steny Hoyer, Saagar, has also, congressional leader. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.